Yes, good morning, everyone, and most welcome to this webinar on the International Women's Day. My name is Annelie Börjesson, and I am president of UNA Sweden. On this year's International Women's Day, we meet in particularly challenging times. Democracy and self-determination are being challenged. Conflict and war are increasing, and the need to promote and protect human rights is painfully obvious. The UNHCR reports that in just 1 week's time, over 1 million refugees from Ukraine have been recorded. Women and children have become the face of one of the most serious refugee crises in our corner of the world, while husbands, fathers, and sons are forced to stay behind and defend their country. The ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only unprovoked and a breach of the UN Charter and international law, but also poses a great threat to civilian lives. We welcome the UN General Assembly resolution urging Russia to immediately withdraw their troops. International Women's Day is celebrated in many countries around the world and was recognized as an official UN Day in 1977. It's a day when women are recognized for their achievements without regard to divisions, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic, or political. It's also an occasion when we reiterate the importance that women and girls can fully enjoy human rights, and a day where we highlight the challenges that are faced around the world. Across the globe, many women and girls still face discrimination on the basis of gender. We have seen the negative effects of a global pandemic, also conflict and war and natural disasters. Gender inequality underpins many problems which disproportionately affect women and girls, such as domestic and sexual violence and lower pay, lack of access to education, and inadequate health care. Conflicts and situations of instability exacerbate pre-existing patterns of discrimination against women and girls, exposing them to heightened risks of violations of their human rights. Conflict can result in higher levels of gender-based violence, including arbitrary killings and torture, sexual violence and forced marriage and child marriage. This year, 2022, marks the 10th year of collaboration between UNFPA and UNA Sweden through the project GIRL, Flicka, that aims to prevent child marriage and female genital mutilation in Ethiopia. Although great progress has been made during this last decade, the number of cases is predicted to rise because of the pandemic. It's more important than ever that we continue to address the long-term and the short-term effects for women and girls. Today, we have invited 3 organizations working on both international and national levels to discuss their work on ensuring the promotion and protection of women's rights in the world today and the challenges that they have seen in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Mette Strandlod, who is from the External Relation of the UNFPA Nordic Office. And the UN Population Fund is the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, working to ensure reproductive health care for women and youth in more than 150 countries. We also say a very warm welcome to Ms. Josefin Sundqvist, who is Secretary General of Läkarmissionen, LM International, which is an international aid organization that is active in 25 countries across Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Eastern Europe. And we are also delighted to have with us here today 2 representatives from the UN Association in Georgia. A warm welcome to Programs Manager, Ms. Tamza Kutchvili, and Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Tiona Libanidze. And UNA Georgia is a local nonprofit organization established in 1995 to promote and protect human rights and support democratic aspirations of the people in Georgia. We have asked each guest here today to share a short presentation of about 10 minutes. And after this, we will continue with some questions. There will be a short moderated discussion. And if you in the audience have questions, you are more than welcome to write them in the chat function the comment section here on Zoom. So now I am very delighted to give the floor to Ms. Mette Strandlod from UNFPA. Mette, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annelie, and thank you for your, I think, very strong introduction. I think you highlighted very well some of my points as well, how gender inequality both makes conflict worse and how conflict makes gender inequality worse. And maybe conflict also takes a little bit focus away from some of the long hauls we are in when we are dealing with changing social norms, and as we are in our long-term 10-year collaboration on the Flickr campaign, which we are really grateful for in UNFPA, which we are both because it provides such significant help to the girls in the Afar region of Ethiopia, because it helps tell the story in Sweden about the work of UNFPA and activate the Swedish public in this work, and because it's actually quite an innovative approach that has been applied in Afar with joining the efforts against child marriage and female genital mutilation, FGM, which makes perfectly good sense because FGM is seen as a way to make girls ready for early marriage. So let us just think back for a few minutes on the time before COVID struck the world. We were in many ways in a very good place. We were in a place, and you could say we are in a place where we know what works. We know that when we talk about changing social norms, when we talk about changing traditions that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, we're in it for the long haul. And we have to, I wouldn't say that we have to come with our raised finger and say these traditions need to change, because we do. We need to work, and that's just what we have done successfully in many countries, have to change the legal framework, making sure that local national law actually is in accordance with what has been agreed in the UN, that female genital mutilation and child marriage has no place in this world. It should not happen, and changing the legal framework shows that it's a strong signal to send. But laws don't change reality necessarily in itself on the ground. So we know that when we have to deal with communities and changing social norms, we can't come from the UN or from anyone else and say, listen, guys, what you're doing is not in accordance with the UN resolution, this or that. No, it has to be done through local authorities. We work with local religious leaders. We work through local health personnel. We work through school teachers. We work through local leaders, local police. All of these people, local authorities, have a role in explaining to the community that no, female genital mutilation is not a tradition of Islam. It's not a tradition of Christianity. Religions don't, fancy that we cut our girls. The teacher can talk to girls and boys about human rights, tell about this issue, that they're actually leaders of the world that have decided that there are some rights that apply to everyone, also to you guys, which makes an impression. Health personnel can tell about the serious potential health consequences that FGM can have, and local leaders can help making the change in the community that girls should have prospects for different futures. Girls shouldn't just be married away at an early age to take care of house and husband. They can actually stay in school and be part of a different future for the community, contributing to economic growth, productivity, and so on and so forth. It's a long haul when we work with FGM. It takes first training of all these local authorities. Then it usually takes a 2 to 3 year period in communities where we have community meetings every 2 weeks where all of these things are discussed, girls groups, parents group discussing these issues. And then slowly parents begin to think that no, what's better for my girl is actually to not be cut. The thing is that parents don't cut their girls to be cruel to them. They cut them because they think it's the best. They cut girls when cutting is what earns your girl acceptability, respectability, and the possibility to marry in your community. But once a critical group of parents decide that no, what's better for our girls is not to be cut. When the parents of boys say, yeah, our boys should marry girls that are not cut, then you can make a change at the community level. And what we do is actually to have sort of a ceremony, a public declaration that now we stop cutting our girls in this community. So we were in many ways in a very good place. But with COVID, we had a setback. With COVID, we had many of the things that cause child marriage, that cause FGM as a precondition for child marriage increase, which is poverty, which is the girls being out of school, which is less income, less security in the family. So marrying with a risk of potential perceived risk of unprotected sex before marriage. What should the girls and boys do when they were at home? So we saw marriage increase, maybe because of income, maybe because of this sort of insecurity. Programs adapted fairly fast. They went online. They went house to house visit. They distributed radios to reach girls that were more marginalized. But what we have found is that while programs were able to adapt, while many girls and families were still reached, those who were difficult to reach during COVID were the ones that were most marginalized. Those that did not have a radio, those we did not reach with a new radio, those who do not have access to a smartphone or a phone where we could send text messages and share knowledge in that way. So I'm afraid I have to say that COVID made it even harder on those most marginalized, those we need to reach the worst and the most. And then, of course, I can't help but ending also with talking about conflict, where we work with the UNA in northern Ethiopia. Right now, programs are extremely difficult. I actually don't have a current status on to which degree we can even carry out programs because there's such a refugee influx that stay at schools and everywhere in the Afar region. We see now girls and children fleeing Ukraine in UNFPA when we try to help women giving birth in the metro stations, in the safety rooms of hospitals. We already had mobile clinics there before because of the conflict in eastern Ukraine. I'm tempted to end by saying that when crisis hit women and girls are hit the most, I don't think it should be a competition, though. I would hate to have a son who had to travel back to Ukraine to fight. It's not a competition about who is worst off, but there is a risk when conflict hits that girls and those most marginalized are left behind once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mette, for this presentation and explanation also of the situation for girls and how COVID have had an impact, negative, unfortunately then. So we will quickly move on. We will get back to you with some questions later on, but now we will move on to our next speaker, who is Ms. Josefine Sundqvist from LM International. So Josephine, please.
Thank you so much, Annelie. It's a great honor to be here. For us, the International Women's Day is very important. We are in a state in the world, as we have heard, not least with the crisis in Ukraine, where it's more important than ever to shed light on the situation that are facing girls and women around the globe. And we have actually a delegation from our organization on the border right now between Ukraine and Romania. And last night, we were out transporting girls that are falling victims of trafficking at the border now between Ukraine and Romania. It is something we have seen the last 3 days. So regardless of where we are in terms of ongoing conflicts around the world, we see the importance of working also not least with protection for women and girls. I will show you a few images in our organization, LM International, or as we say in Swedish, Läkarmissionen. We find it crucial to tell stories because we believe that behind the statistics, there are actual people, actual girls, actual women. And unless we show their faces and images, we cannot really engage, because it's not just statistics and figures, but there are actual people behind. And let me just open my presentation here. I think it's not showing properly now. Let me try this once again. One moment here. I think it's not showing properly, but maybe you can try to show the images, Pearl, and I will continue with my talk. What I want to dig into is what has happened in the light of the pandemic. We have seen the headline for this seminar today, if women's rights have been overshadowed by the pandemics. And the reality in sub-Saharan Africa, where we focus our work in LM International, is that the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic are larger than the actual health effects. I was in DRC in the autumn last year, and I was in a food shelter where we are supporting children with food. And I met a teenage girl, pretty much same age as the girl in this picture. When I saw that she was serving the younger children food, I reacted very strongly. And I said, this is something unacceptable. We cannot have child labor in our own shelter. Of course, those who are serving the food must be adults. I mean, this is unacceptable. And when I started questioning this, Janine, who is the director of the shelter center, she told me, this is in Goma, in Eastern Congo, in Kivu province. She told me, go and speak with the girl and you will hear the reason. So I actually as a child myself, I grew up in Congo. So I happened to know the local language, Swahili. So I sat down and I had a chat with her. Then she said, Josephine, all the kids you see around me that I'm serving food to are actually my own children. I'm 14 years old, but I have 3 children. I had my first child when I was 11, my second child when I was 12, and my third child when I was 14. I was raped 3 times, and these 3 children have 3 different fathers. And when I realized this, I felt a lot of guilt, first of all, for judging her of engaging in child labor, but also I realized the multitude of the challenge. I mean, it's not only sexual violence, it's not only about early marriages and teenage pregnancies, but it's the triple trauma of going through all of this and being a child yourself. And meeting these girls during and in the light of the pandemics have made me to fight much, much, much harder. And the reality is that in many African countries, not least a country like Uganda, where we are also working extensively, by having most of the schools closed for such a long time, have caused an extreme increase in teenage pregnancies, early child marriages, as we heard from Mette earlier. And what we must do is to take up the fight. We must not only come back to where we were prior to the pandemic, but we must really come on track. As we know, for the 17 SDGs, we have indicators. And for SDG 5, which is the SDG concerning gender equality, there are clear indicators, and not least also for SDG 4, right to education. And we have to get these girls back to school. We have to make sure that their lives are dignified, and that also those who are now survivors of sexual violence and teenage mothers, they must also be given opportunities to more of vocational training. Because in many countries, if you're a mother, you're not allowed back to school. So then there must be alternative means installed. If we look at my next image, this is a picture of myself together with Denis Mukwege. As you may know, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for his work with survivors of sexual violence in Eastern Congo. I don't know if you can change slide, Pearl, to the next. And when I visited him, and we have been in constant dialogue because we are working closely with several health facilities in Eastern Congo where Denis Mukwege is in charge. And what he has seen in the light of the pandemic, but also in the light of increased conflict patterns in Eastern Congo, is a direct consequence where the age has dropped in the victims and survivors of sexual violence. Many of them are now 13 to 16 years old. And previously they were older. They were 17 to 25, most of them. So there is a clear drop in age for the girls. What I want to raise as well is that the Maputo Protocol, all of you may not know about the Maputo Protocol, but I would encourage you all in today's seminar to look more into it. But it's the protocol within the African Union that clearly regulates women's and girls' rights. It was adopted by the African Union in 2003. So we are soon entering 2 decades with the Maputo Protocol. This is a very powerful tool. In our work in South Sudan, in LM International, we have pushed the parliament and the women caucus in the parliament to adopt the protocol because it regulates, prohibits FGM, early child marriages, all of those destructive practices we are addressing today. And we can do more with our Swedish feminist foreign policy and in the EU-Africa dialogue, and within our also multilateral space. We can do more to push for a full ratification of the Maputo Protocol, full implementation in countries like Niger, Chad, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, especially for Sahel and Horn of Africa. We are in a good position in Swedish development cooperation to actually do more to push for the full realization of this protocol. Another area where we can do more to round up is when it comes to embracing digital transformation. We have in our organization started extensive work with mobile schools and mobile clinics. In Somalia, we are prototyping a new form of mobile schools for nomad girls in North Somalia, in the areas where girls cannot access any school buildings or school facilities. And there we are prototyping now a software in Somali language where young girls can have the possibility to study their Form 1 to 4 digitally. And what we see in this transformation, the digital transformation, is that we also need to transform policy and legislation. Because in most African countries, there is no recognition of e-examination. So if you study your education digitally, in order to actually get your secondary school degree, you cannot sit for examination from an e-examination. So this is something we see as a key to realize education for all girls and sexual and reproductive health and rights for all girls. So what I want to summarize in my address here is the importance to get back on track with the SDG indicators, in particular for SDG 3, right to health, SDG 4, right to education, and SDG 5, right to gender equality. Second point is that we must embrace digital transformation. We must find solutions for both mobile clinics and mobile schools in situations where girls and women cannot access schools. And the third point is we have to work with Maputo Protocol as an effective tool in the realization of girls and women's rights, in particular also in the light of the pandemic. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine, and thank you for sharing this very strong story also about the child mother. And thank you also for the ideas here of what we have to do, getting back to the SDGs and the Maputo Protocol and so on. It's very interesting to hear. We are now going to move over to our sister UNA in Georgia, and I will now give the floor to Ms. Tamta Kutishvili. Please, Tamta.
Hello. Greetings, everyone. It's my pleasure to participate in today's webinar and celebrate International Women's Day with you. If I may, I also want to use this platform and share my solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and especially Ukrainian women and girls, because women are often considered particularly vulnerable in conflict situations, and they often prove to be surprisingly strong at coping with difficulties. So thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to share my solidarity, and thank you, dear speakers, for such impressive presentations. For me, it's a challenge to make an interesting speech after you, but I will try my best. Regarding my presentation, I will briefly share with you the main challenges related to gender equality and women's rights in Georgia and the initiatives that UNA Georgia implemented in last years. Pearl, as I see, we cannot present slides from your side, right? Do you want me to open it from my computer?
Hi, Tamta. If you could do that, that would be wonderful. And if not, I will give it a try.
Okay, I will try. Just a second then. Okay, it should be here. Can you see now the screen?
Unfortunately, no. Let me give it a try.
Please, thank you. While the presentation, before the presentation is opened, I will start to give you some bigger picture about the Georgia's the current situation in Georgia regarding gender equality. Firstly, should be mentioned that Georgia made some significant strides toward in creating an enabling environment for gender equality in the past 30 years, including adoption of the gender equality law, the law of the elimination of all forms of discrimination, as well as international conventions for protecting women against violence. Should be mentioned also providing specialized services for victims of gender-based violence and raising public awareness on the need to combat gender-based violence. Despite these efforts, women and girls in Georgia still face violence in their private and public lives due to social and economic inequality, a limited political participation of women, stigma, and deeply rooted harmful stereotypes. I want to highlight particularly some of the challenges, and if possible, please move to the third slide. Okay, thank you so much. Great. Despite high educational attainments, women face more limited access to economic opportunities than men. According to Human Capital Index 2021, only 43% of working age women participating in labor markets. Beside household responsibilities such as childcare or elderly care discourage women's labor force participation, counteracting the positive impacts of women's education. Regarding challenges in education, women tend to graduate in arts and humanities, education and healthcare mostly, while men are more likely to major in engineering, manufacturing, agriculture, and services. Shortly to say, women are generally excluded from industrial activities and science. One of the biggest challenges remains gender-based violence across the country. According to the World Bank's country gender assessment from the last year, over a quarter of surveyed women had experienced some of the gender-based violence. Intimate partner violence and child marriage are among the most prevalent forms of violence against women in Georgia. Women are still being killed by current or former partners and family members, in spite of a number of positive steps taken in the direction of combating violence against women and domestic violence. Many challenges remain in the fight against femicide and the administration of justice on these cases. To give you more picture in numbers, over 150 cases of femicide have been reported in Georgia in the last 6 years, according to the Public Defender's Report of Georgia. Another challenge that need to be mentioned is sex-selective abortion cases. The picture is more dramatic in the regions, interpreting a skewed sex ratio at birth as missing girls highlights the loss of girls due to a preference for sons. Regarding sexual and reproductive health, lack of availability of youth-friendly sexual and reproductive health services coupled with cultural stigma hinders youth access to youth-friendly services and information. Education on reproductive health and rights for youth has not been institutionalized in the formal education, and mostly informal and peer-to-peer education methods have been employed to reach out to young people with correct messages and information. And the last but really important that need to be mentioned, that women's political participation and their influence on critical decision making still remain low. The latest parliamentary and local elections showed improvements in increasing women's political representation, but still left Georgia with a man-dominated political landscape. Next slide, please. To understand the lasting effects of the pandemic on men and women, the special assessment was carried out by Georgian Research Agency with the financial support of UN organizations in Georgia. Since we have a limited time and I don't want to exceed the set time, I will just shortly sum up that the pandemic has been further exposed and amplified the gendered impact of pre-existing structural inequalities in social, political, and economic systems. And if anyone from our audience is more interested in the results of the study, I will be happy to share the presentation with this slide and also the assessment document. And now I will move a little bit more about the UNAG's work, and Pearl, please move to the next slide. Yes, gender equality and women's rights are the cross-cutting objectives of our diverse programs and projects. UNAG is one of the biggest target groups are young people, youth. With our support, there are 14 youth centers functioning across the country on the civil society organizations basis. 2 of them are located in the capital city, Tbilisi, and the rest are in the regional municipalities. And one of the activities where we invited the most motivated young activists to participate was a gender equality task force initiative. Please, the next slide, Pearl. Yeah, as I mentioned, the gender equality and women's rights still remains a challenging issue across the country. So in order to meet these challenges in a more consolidated manner, UNAG established Gender Equality Task Force in partnership with governmental organizations. The major goal of establishing this gender equality so-called task force, as we said, was to raise public awareness on the implications of early marriage, child marriage, and gender-based violence across communities in the most remote villages of Georgia. For this initiative, UNA Georgia provided training of trainers for the members of Gender Equality Task Force in partnership with the Office of State Ministry of Reconciliation and Civic Equality in Georgia, also Ministry of Justice, and the State Fund for Protecting and Assistance of Victims of Human Trafficking. After 1 week training of trainers, the 80 members of Gender Equality Task Force have been delivering trainings in the most remote villages of Georgia about gender-based violence and implications of child marriage. In order to organize as efficient information meetings as possible, the bilingual presentations were organized. To highlight here, we have 2 main ethnic minority communities. This is ethnic Azerbaijani community and ethnic Armenians, and majority of them, the Georgian language is not their language that they can speak and can work. So we decided to deliver presentations in both languages that enable them to be actively involved in discussions, ask questions, and get the information as much as possible. All this, as a result, the mobile task force members delivered over 280 trainings, engaging up to 8,000 beneficiaries across the country, including teachers, their peers, school students, parents, and community leaders, and covered up to 200 villages in 21 municipalities, and it was absolutely done voluntarily. Another initiative that I think that would be nice to share with you, it's a Women Portraits initiative. Next slide, please. Last year, to celebrate Women History Month, UNAG implemented a project, this initiative. Within the Women Portraits initiative, we developed over 20 photo stories depicting women from different professions and occupations, with different ethnic and religious backgrounds, age groups, etc. Among them were, for example, teachers, school principals, doctors, judges, politicians, the ones who are authorities, let's say, in our communities. And the photo essays were shared via social media and was organized in exhibitions in Tbilisi. And those women were acting like a real role models for different communities, especially for the people with vulnerable backgrounds. And another, let's say, practice that I wanted to share with you is on the next slide. It's a traveling university. Actually, UNA Georgia's concept for traveling university was inspired by its youth work through the Fostering Inclusive Democracy program that is implemented in partnership with UNA Sweden. The traveling university reverses the traditionally urban-centric communication channels and seeks to provide engaging education to the most vulnerable and underserved populations in Georgia, including rural communities that have very limited access to economic, social or political life of the country. Within the Traveling University Initiative, UNAG organized lectures on gender equality, women's rights and girls' reproductive health, and reach both youth and adults, including parents who have limited or no access to formal and informal education. And in addition, these communities are also most susceptible to the taboos and false narratives against women's rights, family planning, or sexual and reproductive health services in Georgia. Yeah, it was, I tried to set in a limited time and be as much briefly as possible. If there is any question from the audience, we'll be happy to answer with my colleague here, with Teona. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tampa, for this interesting presentation. And as always, when we have these webinars with interesting panelists, time really flies and we don't have much time left. But I did see a question from David Hansson in the chat. David, would you like to ask a question? If you're still there, otherwise I can take it. Okay. Anyways, David asked about an answer for the fastest way to end child marriage. So if I just drop this to the panelists, who would like to answer? What can be done to end child marriage, usually from your perspective? Fastest way. Mette.
Should I say something? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you. Well, I think that I really think that our reply is that it's not fast. I mean, it's not fast interventions that can do this, and I think maybe that we have tried fast. For instance, providing an incentive, like almost an economic or material incentive for having girls stay in school and so on and so forth, which I can't say doesn't work. It may work to keep girls in school for a while, keeping them out of marriage, but it's just when you don't really go to the underlying level of changing norms, of changing attitudes, it's a much more vulnerable intervention. So it works as long as you provide this incentive, but as long as you don't really change minds and attitudes, it doesn't work. So I don't know if fast is the real parameter to judge this on. I think what we have found with these things, as child marriage, as FGM, as these things that are really deeply rooted traditions, slow is better, because slow works better in the long run. And we have gone back to communities where we have done this social norm change over a period of years before communities have decided themselves to change their practice, and the change is still there. So I would not go for fast, I would go for quality.
Thank you so much, Mette. Josephine, I see you raise your hand as well, if you would like to.
Yes, I would like to say three things. One is, of course, statistics speak, and we need the girls back in school. It is the most effective way to end child marriages. And then we must have more flexible solutions. It takes time to build school buildings. It takes time to train teachers. But if we can have mobile, more agile solutions, we can get more girls into school fast without losing a generation. So that is what we see. Another thing I would like to second what Mette said about social norms transformation. I think the group which often is addressed as moral duty bearers, faith leaders, clan leaders, cultural leaders, those who are not legal duty bearers, but moral duty bearers, they must be more incorporated into our programs because they hold a lot of moral power. And if we can get them on board to push for girls' rights to education, we can go far.
Thank you so much, Josephine, for this. I'm thinking, since we don't have much time left, if you need to leave, do so. And if you can stay just a few more minutes, do so. I was thinking now, since we have conflict here, there, and not everywhere, but quite a lot of places around the globe. How does your organizations adapt when it comes to meet the challenges in this world that we see today, to contribute and try to change to the better? Who would like to start? Josephine, I see your hand. Could you? Okay.
So I would say how we adapt is that we see that now we have increased number of conflicts and fragile states. So we are working more within the triple nexus, which is about linking humanitarian development and peace building. And I think this is something that we all must do, regardless if we are traditionally humanitarian actors or development actors or peace building actors. We have to find the linkages, because girls are falling in between. And if we are not managing to coordinate ourselves well, girls will fall victims. So one is that we work more in the triple nexus. Another one is that we embrace, as I said, digital transformation and innovative solutions. And the third is that we are also trying to work beyond the formal structures. A lot of girls and women are in the informal economies, in communities, and they are not incorporated in the formal structures. So we must also get those girls and women into the data, the SDG data, so that we can have a full coverage of how the situation is looking like.
Thank you, Josephine, for this. Mette, would you like to continue there? I saw that you raised your hand before.
Yeah, no, I agree, of course, with the triple nexus, and we are very much involved in that too. But maybe a more practical level reply is that when conflicts hit, women don't stop giving birth. Women don't stop, and men don't stop having sex. Women may even be subjected to unwanted sex, sexual violence. There's a need for continued access to health services, to birth attendants, to contraception. And all of that we do, and we do it in a phased approach when disaster hits. First, we have like a very, very simple safe birth delivery kit, a couple of sheets, a sterile thing to cut the cord, a little bit of sterile string, soap, very basic things that can basically save the life of especially the child, or also potentially the mother, preventing infection if you give birth on the side of the road. Then we have maternity clinics in maternitainer, basically a container which is a full birthing unit. You can drive out to wherever it's needed. It takes a little bit longer than the little package, but that would be the next thing we do. And then we distribute dignity kits, access to which contains some clothes, again, soap, detergent, underwear. And I have to admit that initially I thought a little bit, okay, is that important? Until I spoke to refugees who said, you know, you come from a normal life and suddenly you're a refugee. You can't wash, you can smell yourself, you can't comb your hair, you can't change your underwear. It's the biggest loss of dignity. So even having those basic necessities just makes you stand a little bit stronger, believing a little bit more in the day tomorrow. So it does make a difference. And we distribute those around Ukraine now. We are on the border and help the women and girls there.
Thank you, Mette. I'm thinking the last question then to Una Georgia. If we take a look at the work of Una Georgia, what would you say would be the biggest challenges for you when it comes to the rights of girls and women today?
Tiona, I saw you raise the hand. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on what Mette was saying, that yes, I mean, we are very emotional now because of the Ukraine conflict, but we had, well, a smaller version of that in Georgia in 2008. And although we're not a humanitarian organization at all at that moment, for a month or so, we were there, you know, gathering the resources and going to the internally displaced. Well, they were not refugees because they were coming from the conflict affected territories of Georgia. But exactly, I mean, what Mette was saying, they had left their homes, and it was about the dignity, you know. They needed such a very, very simple, very simple things, you know, to feel like human again. So it is very important, you know, to show, at least to show emotionally, that somebody is there for you in this very difficult situation. And yes, women and our children and elderly are very, very vulnerable at that moment. So I just wanted to tell both of you, thank you. What you are doing in Ukraine, it's very, very important. So thanks for that. And that's it. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Tiona, and I apologize, I didn't see your hand. So thanks thank you, Tamta, for addressing here. Okay, so I think that we are actually out of time, and I want to thank each and every one of you for attending the webinar, and a special thanks to our panelists. It's been very interesting, and indeed we could spend a day listening to and discussing various issues and so on. There's so much to say, really. To the audience, I would just like to say that if you're interested in these questions and also in other international related matters, you're more than welcome to visit the website of UNA Sweden at fn.se, where you can also become a member if you would like to. And with this said, I want to thank you all again for being with us here this morning, and I would like to wish you all a happy International Women's Day, and good luck with all your work, and take care. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.